After 7 years away, I flew home for Grandpa's funeral. Mom opened the door, but her new husband greeted me with his fist. He said this wasn't my house anymore. He had no idea I still had the original deed papers. And a very good lawyer. Chapter 1. The fist came first. That's how I was welcomed home after 7 long years. Not a hug. Not a tearful reunion. Not even a cold nod from my mother. No, my homecoming was a hard, unhesitating punch straight to the face. The blow landed with such sudden force that I lost my balance on the porch step. My head snapped back, white sparks exploded in my vision, and my hands clawed at the wooden railing just to keep me upright. The sharp sting spread across my cheek, then down into my jaw, radiating like fire licking through bone. And there he was. The man standing in the doorway was not my grandfather, not a relative, not even a familiar face from the neighborhood. He was tall and broad, his body filling the doorframe like a blockade. His suit looked too expensive for this quiet street. His cologne stung the air like varnish, and his eyes glinted with the kind of arrogance that grows when a man thinks he owns everything in sight. "This isn't your house anymore," he said. His voice smooth and low, practiced in the way only liars and predators manage. "Leave. And don't come back." Before I could speak, before I could even register what had happened, he slammed the door. The sound was final. It echoed in my ears longer than the pain of the fist. For a few seconds I just stood there, frozen on the porch. My hand pressed against my throbbing cheek, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I looked through the side window, and that's when I saw her. My mother, standing behind him. Her face had aged, her hair colored into a glossy shade that didn't suit her. Her makeup painted on like a mask. For a heartbeat I thought she might step forward. I thought she might reach for me. She didn't. Her eyes darted away like a guilty child's, and she turned her head. As if she hadn't just watched her daughter get struck. As if my existence was a burden she'd agreed to erase. 7 years away. 7 years of silence. 7 years of convincing myself that the ache of abandonment had dulled. And yet here I was, standing at the same house where I learned to ride a bike, where I baked my first burnt cookies, where my grandfather built every wall with his scarred hands, and I was treated like an intruder. Grief had pulled me here. My grandfather's funeral was tomorrow, and the weight of that loss pressed heavier on me than the bruise blooming on my face. I had expected coldness from my mother, maybe even disdain. But this. A stranger's fist. A stranger in my grandfather's doorway claiming the house as his own. That was erasure. I stepped off the porch slowly, my shoes clicking against the wood that creaked in familiar tones, as if the house itself recognized me even if my own family didn't. The oak tree loomed in the yard, thick and proud, its branches clawing at the sky. Beneath it, long ago, Grandpa had helped me bury my first dog in a shoebox. I stared at that patch of ground, and the lump in my throat nearly choked me. But even through the sting of humiliation, another memory burned brighter. Grandpa's voice, steady and low. "Keep the paper safe, Serena. Paper outlives lives." Because Garrett. Yes, I remembered his name now, Garrett Stone, the man who had wormed his way into my mother's life. Had no idea what I carried. Tucked in the lining of my suitcase was an envelope, edges worn but intact. The original deed papers. The truth. And beyond that, I had something even stronger. Very good lawyer. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. I walked down the steps, my cheeks swelling, my pride shattered, but my resolve sharpening. The man had fists, had paper, and sometimes paper cuts deeper. The rented car waited at the curb. My hands shook as I opened the door, slid into the seat, and gripped the steering wheel like it might anchor me. Through the windshield, the house stared back at me. It looked familiar, yet strange, like a body dressed in the wrong clothes. The shutters were a different color. The garden beds were too manicured, sterile, empty of the tomatoes Grandpa once whispered to before sunrise. I whispered aloud, "Grandpa, what did they do to our home?" But no answer came. Only the hum of cicadas in the trees, the echo of the door slam in my ears, and the bruise that pulsed every time I moved my jaw. I drove without direction. Past the gas station where Grandpa once bought me root beers and peppermint sticks. Past the church with its steeple stabbing into a gray sky. Past the cracked sidewalks where I had scraped my knees as a child. Every turn of the wheel pulled another memory from me like thorns dragging through fabric. And every memory reminded me This was my place, my story, my inheritance. Not his. Eventually, the road led me to a roadside motel. The sign buzzed in red neon, half the letters flickering out. The clerk barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as he handed me a key on a plastic fob. The room smelled faintly of bleach and mildew, and the carpet bore the ghosts of 1,000 cigarette burns. The air conditioner rattled like it had been coughing for decades. But it was a roof. And tonight I needed a roof. I set my bag on the creaky bed, pulled off my jacket, and pressed the cracked ice bucket against my cheek. The cold burned almost as much as the punch had, but at least it numbed me. I leaned back against the wall and listened. Through the thin walls, I could hear muffled arguments from the couple next door. Baby cried 2 doors down. Somewhere outside, a dog barked at nothing. The world moved on, uncaring of my bruise, my grief, my home stolen from me. But grief doesn't erase truth. And neither does a fist. I unzipped my suitcase and reached into the lining. My fingers closed around the worn envelope, and I pulled it out gently, like it was a relic. I laid it on the table beneath the flickering lamp and unfolded the pages. The paper was yellowed but firm, the ink bold where my grandfather's name curved across the bottom. Proof. Not just of a house, but of a legacy. Proof that this place belonged to us, not to Garrick, no matter how many fists or forged words he tried to use. I traced my finger along Grandpa's handwriting. My throat tightened. His voice came back to me, steady, patient, kind. Paper outlives lies. But paper alone is fragile. Paper can be ignored, torn, laughed at. What I needed was someone who knew how to turn paper into a weapon. And I knew exactly who to call. Sleep that night came in fragments. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Garrick's fist, the smug curl of his lip, the way my mother turned away. I saw the house as it once was, warm, messy, filled with the smell of tomatoes and peppermint. And I saw it now, sterile, painted, alien. I dreamed of Grandpa too. He sat on the porch swing, whittling wood as he used to, the oak tree shading him in the summer light. He looked up at me and smiled. But then in the dream, Garrick appeared behind him, looming, erasing, and when I tried to scream, no sound came out. I woke before dawn, my cheek aching, the papers still spread across the table. The motel's fluorescent light buzzed overhead, and the world outside was still dark. I sat up, slid the papers back into the envelope, and tucked it under my pillow like a child hiding treasure. Tomorrow would be the funeral. Tomorrow I would face them again. Tomorrow I would sit in the back of the church, unseen and unacknowledged, but present. And tomorrow, I would begin the quiet war that Garrick never expected. Because here's the truth about me. When I begin, I do not stop. And Garrick Stone had no idea what he had just started. Chapter 2. I hit the ground before I realized I'd fallen. The motel carpet scraped my knees as I stumbled forward in the dark, breath sharp, heart drumming in my ears. It wasn't Garrick's fist this time. It was memory, so sharp, so heavy it knocked me down without warning. Grandpa's voice, deep and steady, threaded through the silence of that small room. Paper outlives lies, Serena. I pressed my palms to the floor, steadying myself. The motel's hum, the fridge rattling, the pipes ticking, felt louder than it should have. For a moment I thought someone was outside my door. I crawled to the window, pulled the curtain back an inch, and stared out at the empty parking lot. Nothing but the orange glow of a flickering street lamp. Still I didn't feel alone. My cheeks still ached from Garrick's punch. The swelling had darkened into a bruised mask, a reminder that I'd been erased with one swing, one cruel sentence. This isn't your house anymore. But the envelope on the motel table disagreed. The papers disagreed. And maybe if I was brave enough, the law would disagree too. I didn't sleep that night. I kept imagining the slam of that door, the way my mother's eyes had slid past me as if I were a stranger. That betrayal burned worse than Garrick's blow. 'Cause she knew. She had to know what Grandpa wanted. And still, she had let this man step into the doorway, into my life, with his fists and his cologne and his claims. The next morning came slow, a tired sun bleeding across the curtains. I dressed for the funeral, pulling the black dress from my bag, smoothing wrinkles with shaking hands. I thought about staying hidden, skipping it, letting them think I'd been scared off. But no. I would not let my grandfather's funeral pass without me. The church smelled like lilies and dust. I slipped into the last pew, unnoticed, just another figure in black. My mother sat near the front with Garrick beside her. His arm draped protectively, possessively, around her shoulders. His chin was high, smug even in mourning. My jaw clenched until my teeth ached. The service droned on. Eulogies. Words that floated but didn't land. My eyes kept drifting to the casket, to the old wood polished until it gleamed. I tried to picture Grandpa lying inside, but my mind refused. Instead I saw him in the garden, kneeling in the dirt with his tomatoes, or sitting on the porch peeling an apple with that pocket knife he always carried. I gripped the pew so hard my nails bent. When the final hymn ended and people began to file out, I stayed seated, waiting for the crowd to thin. That's when I felt it, the weight of someone watching me. I turned and saw him, a man leaning in the shadows near the side aisle. His eyes were steady, curious, almost too steady. He didn't look away when I caught him. He just gave a small nod like he knew something. Then he vanished through the side door before I could stand. I told myself I was imagining things, just raw nerves. But the unsettled feeling stayed with me as I left, as I walked alone back to the motel under the flat gray sky. That night, I spread the deed papers out on the table again. Proof. Evidence. My fingers traced Grandpa's signature, the way his pen had pressed hard into the page. That's when I noticed the faint markings on the back. Numbers. Coordinates. First I thought they were scribbles. But then the memory clicked. Grandpa had been meticulous. He wouldn't leave stray marks without reason. I opened my laptop, connected to the sputtering motel Wi-Fi, and typed the numbers. My pulse jumped when the screen lit up with a map. It pointed to a regional bank, the kind of place you'd drive past without noticing, and listed under the branch name in small faded letters. Safety deposit box. I sat back shaking. Grandpa had left me breadcrumbs. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The next morning, I walked into the bank with the envelope clutched tight under my arm. The clerk eyed me warily, asked too many questions, studied my ID as if I might vanish. But finally, reluctantly, she slid a small metal box across the counter. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, documents. Dozens of them. Letters, drafts, even journals, all in Grandpa's cramped handwriting. Paper trails stacked like bricks in a wall. He had kept everything. I carried the box back to the motel, spreading the contents out until the table disappeared beneath paper. Letters to his attorney naming me as heir. Drafts of wills, each with my name written clear. Bank statements, receipts, notes. And tucked inside, a small leather notebook filled with his spidery script. Keep the papers safe, Serena. Paper outlives lies. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat, the notebook open in my lap, feeling the weight of it all. Garrick thought he'd erased me with one punch, one door slam. He had no idea what my grandfather had left behind. But paper was fragile and I needed help. That's when I thought of her, Mireille Danton. A lawyer I'd met years ago at a clinic. Sharp as glass, unshakable, with eyes that saw through lies like smoke. I found her number in my old phone and dialed before I could lose courage. She answered on the second ring. Serena Vale. Her voice was cool but not unkind. Yes, I whispered. I need help. I told her everything. A fist. A door. The funeral. Papers. She didn't interrupt. Just listened, and when I finished she said, "Bring me everything. Tonight. And Serena, don't go near him again. Not yet." I packed the papers carefully, slid them back into the envelope, and drove across town to her office. She greeted me in a plain gray suit, hair pulled tight, eyes sharper than I remembered. She spread the papers across her desk, scanning quickly, making notes in the margins. "This is strong," she said finally. Stronger than I expected. Her confidence steadied me. For the first time since stepping off the plane, I felt like maybe I wasn't alone. But then her expression shifted. She picked up one of Garrick's supposed wills, the one my mother must have signed with him, and frowned. "This is sloppy. Too sloppy." She turned the page, showed me the notary stamp. Expired. 2 years before the date written here. She tapped the font, the margins. "This is a forgery." The word hit me like thunder. Forgery. Proof that Garrick hadn't just lied. He'd broken the law. Mireille leaned back, eyes calculating. "We'll need more. Digital evidence. Metadata. Do you still trust anyone?" I hesitated, then nodded. "One person. Maybe." That's how Corvin Hale entered my story. A digital forensics specialist Mireille trusted. Quiet, deliberate, with a kind of mind that saw ghosts in machines. He came to the motel with a laptop and a portable scanner, moving like a shadow. Within hours, he uncovered edits in Garrick's documents, timestamps made weeks after Grandpa's death. The evidence stacked higher, heavier. And with each discovery, I felt the ground under Garrick's polished shoes begin to crack. But I also felt something else, the weight of being watched. The shadow at the funeral. The sense of eyes outside the motel. Late that night, as I walked to the ice machine, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, heart racing, but the hallway was empty. Only the hum of the machine, the buzz of the lights. Still, I couldn't shake it. Someone was watching. Someone new. And when I returned to my room, envelope clutched tight, I found something slipped under my door. Note. Just 6 words scrawled in heavy ink. Stop digging or you'll regret it. I froze, blood draining cold. Because the handwriting wasn't Garrick's. It was my mother's. Chapter 3. I didn't breathe for a full minute after I saw the note. 6 words. Slanted handwriting too familiar to mistake. My mother's hand. Stop digging or you'll regret it. The paper trembled between my fingers as if it held fire. For a moment I thought I might rip it apart, shred it into meaningless scraps, pretend I had never seen it. But my chest burned with another feeling. Something hotter, heavier, more dangerous. Rage. Not at Garrick. Her. My mother. The woman who gave me life had written a threat as if I were her enemy. The motel clock ticked loud in the silence. I sat on the bed staring at the note, replaying every memory of her face at the funeral, the way she avoided my eyes, the way she clung to Garrick's arm like a lifeline. And now this. A warning. Command to disappear. But I wasn't leaving. I folded the note, slid it into the envelope with the deed, and told myself one truth. If my own mother was willing to turn against me, then Garrick's corruption ran deeper than I realized. I didn't sleep that night either. I lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening for footsteps outside. At every creak of the hallway, I imagined Garrick or my mother or someone else slipping a key into my lock. My heart jumped at shadows. I pressed my back to the wall, clutching the papers to my chest like a shield. By morning, the fear had hardened into something sharper. Resolve. I drove back to Mireille's office as the sun cracked over the horizon. She looked up from her desk when I entered, instantly reading the tension in my face. What happened? She asked. I dropped the note in front of her. She read it once, her jaw tightening. This is your mother's writing. Yes, I whispered. The word tasted like ash. Mireille sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Then she's deeper in this than we thought. Garrick didn't just marry her for companionship. He married her for cover. Her words sliced me open. I wanted to argue, to defend my mother even after everything, but the note burned in my memory. My mother's warning had been cold, deliberate. She wasn't a victim. She was a participant. Corvin entered a few minutes later, carrying his laptop. He took one look at the note and frowned. That's not good, he said flatly. If she's in this with him, then whatever we find will threaten both of them. And that means they'll get desperate. Desperate. The word rang in my ears all day. We spread the documents across the table again, triple-checking details, comparing signatures, analyzing metadata. Corvin discovered more discrepancies. Edits logged at hours no lawyer's office would ever be open, notary seals that belonged to counties miles away. Every line screamed fraud. Every discovery felt like another brick stacked against Garrick. But every discovery also tightened the danger around me. By evening I returned to the motel. I tried to eat dinner from the diner down the street, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, but the food turned to paste in my mouth. My appetite had vanished the moment I'd read my mother's note. I opened Grandpa's leather notebook, searching for comfort. His words steadied me. Truth takes patience. Paper outlives lies. I traced his handwriting with my finger until my breathing calmed. That's when the phone rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The motel phone, not my cell. I stared at it, frozen. Nobody knew this number. Slowly I lifted the receiver. Serena Vale, a man's voice said, smooth and low. You need to stop. My throat closed. Who is this? Silence. Then. The papers won't save you. Walk away before it's too late. The line clicked dead. I sat there shaking, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. I locked every bolt, shoved a chair under the door handle, and sat awake with my back to the wall until dawn. Sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford. The next morning I met Mireille again. I told her about the call. Her face darkened. "They're escalating. That means we're close to something big. What if they hurt me?" "Yes." My voice cracked despite my best effort. She leaned forward, eyes fierce. "Then we make sure you're not alone anymore. They want you scared, isolated. That's how men like Garrick win. But you're not alone, Serena. Not as long as I'm here." For the first time I believed her. We spent hours preparing the first legal motion, a request to freeze all property transfers tied to Grandpa's estate. If the court granted it, Garrick wouldn't be able to sell or mortgage the house. It was only a small hold, but it would buy us time. The night before the hearing, I sat in the motel staring at the envelope of papers, whispering aloud like Grandpa used to when he talked to his tomato plants. "Stay strong. Don't let them take this from me." When morning came, I wore the same black dress I'd worn to the funeral. I wanted Garrick to see me standing tall, not erased. Mireille walked beside me into the courthouse, steady as a rock. Garrick was already there, smug in his expensive suit, my mother at his side like a shadow. His eyes flicked to my bruised cheek, then to the envelope in my hands. For the first time, I saw a flash of something beneath his smirk. Nerves. The hearing was short. Mireille presented the deed, the letters, the inconsistencies in Garrick's will. The judge listened, expression unreadable. Garrick's lawyer argued loudly, but his words faltered against the weight of evidence. Finally, the judge leaned forward and spoke the sentence that made my knees weak. "There is sufficient cause to place a temporary freeze on the estate until further review." Freeze. We had bought time. Garrick couldn't sell. He couldn't transfer. He couldn't erase. I walked out of that courtroom with tears stinging my eyes. It wasn't victory, not yet. But it was the first crack in Garrick's wall. Hi viewers, tell me something. If you were in my shoes, would you keep fighting or would you have walked away already? Drop your answer below. I want to know how strong you would be in this moment. That night, back in the motel, I found another note under my door. My stomach dropped before I even picked it up. But this one was different. It wasn't my mother's handwriting. The paper was torn from a yellow legal pad. The words were rushed, uneven. "He's not who you think. Check the bank records. Look closer. No name. No signature. Just a warning, but a different kind. One that felt less like a threat and more like help." I showed Mireille the next morning. She frowned, turning the paper over in her hands. "Someone on the inside," she murmured. "Someone who wants you to see the truth." Corvin dug deeper. He hacked into bank records tied to Garrick, cross-referencing with the dates of Grandpa's hospitalization. What he found made my blood boil. Thousands of dollars withdrawn from Grandpa's accounts in the weeks before his death. Transfers Garrick couldn't explain. Money that disappeared into private accounts. He wasn't just trying to steal the house. He had been bleeding my grandfather dry while he was dying. The rage that surged through me then was unlike anything I'd felt. It wasn't sadness or betrayal. It was pure fury. My hands shook as I slammed the papers on the table. "He killed him," I whispered. Maybe not with his hands, but with his greed. "He killed him." Mireille placed a hand on mine, steadying me. "Then we prove it. Every cent, every forgery, every lie. We'll put it all in front of the judge." But Garrick wasn't waiting quietly. That night, as I drove back to the motel, headlights flared in my rearview mirror. Too close. Blinding. I pressed the gas, heart racing, but the car behind me stayed glued to my bumper. The highway was empty, just me and him. My hand slipped on the steering wheel as adrenaline surged. I swerved onto a side road, hoping to lose him, but the headlights followed. My pulse pounded in my throat. The car lunged closer, bumping my rear bumper. I screamed, gripping the wheel as the tires skidded. Another hit. My car fishtailed. I fought to control it, hands shaking. The third hit sent me spinning. The world glowed, headlights and darkness collided. My car crashed into the ditch, metal crunching, glass shattering. Airbags exploded against my chest. Please. I gasped for breath, chest aching, ears ringing. The headlights stopped behind me, flooding the ditch with white light. The door opened. Footsteps crunched on gravel, slow, deliberate. I fumbled for the seatbelt, tried to move, but my body wouldn't listen. The footsteps drew closer. A shadow leaned into the glow of the broken glass, face still hidden. And then, through the ringing in my ears, I heard it. My mother's voice. Why couldn't you just let it go? Chapter 4. The house was too quiet, almost unnervingly so, when Evelyn stepped through the front door that morning. The silence wasn't the kind of peace a person longed for after a night of chaos. It was the kind that carried weight, like air just before a thunderstorm. The storm had already broken the night before, but this morning she knew it wasn't done. Never ended all at once. It lingered, dragging its claws into the heart until you felt every scratch. Evelyn could feel those claws now, raking across her chest as she stood in the center of the living room. Her hands shook slightly as she ran them along the worn wood of the banister. The memories from the night before were painted on every surface. The shouting, the accusations, the ugly truths that had crawled out of shadows and into the light. She had thought, foolishly, that confronting Richard, forcing him to see her, to admit to his betrayal, might end the nightmare. Instead, it had only deepened. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't begged for forgiveness. He had looked her in the eye, shrugged and walked out. Just like that. Like 25 years of marriage had been nothing more than a handshake agreement he could walk away from. And now the silence mocked her. Evelyn closed her eyes, steadying her breathing, but when she opened them again, the quiet seemed louder. It screamed at her that she was alone. She sank into the couch, hands gripping the cushion until her knuckles blanched white. That was when the thought hit her. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. Richard had declared it without speaking the words, and she, whether she liked it or not, was already in the fight. Do you know what it feels like when life flips the table? When everything you believe steady and true suddenly shatters beneath you? That's where Evelyn was. And I'll ask you this, friends. What would you do if the person you trusted most treated you as disposable, like a stranger on the street? Would you crumble, or would you rise? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Evelyn's mind flashed back to Richard's parting words. So casual they burned worse than shouting. I'll come back for my things, he'd muttered. That was it. No regard for the wreckage he left behind. No care for the fact that the woman he once called his soulmate was crumbling inside the walls of the life they had built together. That wasn't a man leaving a marriage. That was a man abandoning a battlefield, certain he had already won. But he hadn't won. Not yet. As Evelyn sat there, her gaze fell on the mantel above the fireplace. There were pictures lined neatly in frames, each one a snapshot of the life they had shared. Their wedding day, a vacation to Maine with the children still small enough to cling to her legs, family Christmases where Richard had smiled wide, his arm draped around her shoulder. She stood, lifted one of the frames, and stared at it for a long moment. Then, with a calmness that surprised even her, she set it back down, not gently, but with a finality that made the glass rattle. That man in the photos wasn't the man she knew anymore. That man was gone. And if he wanted war, then she would show him just how much fight she had left in her. The first step, she decided, was not to collapse. The first step was to stand. So she did. Evelyn rose from the couch and marched into the kitchen, where she pulled open the drawer and grabbed a pen and a yellow notepad. If Richard thought she was the kind of woman who would be caught off guard, who would just sob quietly into the night while he dismantled their lives, he was mistaken. She had seen too much, endured too much, to let him walk away clean. Her list began small. Bank accounts, insurance, pensions, the practical things. She scribbled furiously, her hand aching as she wrote, but she didn't stop. Then the list grew darker. Secrets. Ways. She thought of the phone calls she had overheard, the receipts she had found tucked into his jacket pocket, the mysterious late nights that never added up. A pattern was forming, and for the first time, she saw clearly what she had missed in the fog of love and loyalty. And beneath it all was one undeniable truth. Richard had underestimated her. The morning slipped into afternoon as Evelyn's plan took shape, but the silence still pressed on her, filling every corner. She needed air. She needed space. So she grabbed her coat and walked outside, the chilly October breeze stinging her cheeks as if the world itself wanted to remind her she was still alive. On the street, neighbors were busying themselves with their daily routines, mowing lawns, carrying groceries, chatting idly on porches. Evelyn walked among them, her head held high, though inside she felt the weight of a collapsing universe. None of them knew. None of them saw the cracks. And maybe that was good. For now she would carry the mask. But beneath it, her heart was burning. She walked aimlessly until she reached the small coffee shop on the corner. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside, the warmth of roasted beans and soft chatter wrapping around her. She ordered a black coffee and sat at a table by the window. She needed to think. And that's when she saw him. Richard. Cross the street. With her. Not the woman Evelyn had once suspected, but another. Younger, her hair cascading in loose curls. Her hand looped through his as if it belonged there. They were laughing. As if the devastation inside Evelyn's chest was nothing more than a comedy to them. Her breath caught. Her heart hammered so loud she thought the people in the cafe must have heard it. Her hands trembled, and she nearly spilled the coffee across the table. He hadn't even waited a full day. Now I want to pause and ask you. Can you imagine that moment? To see the person you built your life with, parading down the street with someone else, while you sit in a cafe like a ghost, invisible, discarded. Tell me in the comments, would you have stormed out there, confronted him right in public? Or would you have sat, waiting, watching, letting the rage simmer until the right moment? Evelyn didn't move. Not yet. She watched, every detail burning into her mind. The way his hand rested easily at the small of the woman's back. The way he leaned close, whispering something that made her throw her head back in laughter. She memorized it all. Because when her time came, when her plan was ready, those images would fuel her. But for now she remained still. The woman at the counter called her name for a refill, breaking her trance. She blinked, realizing her coffee had gone cold, untouched. She stood, grabbed the cup and left. She didn't look across the street again. She didn't need to. The fire had already been lit. That night, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table again, the notepad in front of her, and added a new item to the list. Watch. She would watch. She would wait. And she would not miss her chance. The days that followed became a blur of routine and surveillance. She lived two lives now. The one her neighbors saw, smiling politely, attending Sunday service, picking up groceries, and the one she kept hidden, the one filled with observation and planning. She learned Richard's patterns. She knew when he left work, where he went, who he saw. Every detail was a puzzle piece, and she was determined to complete the picture. But even with her focus sharp, there were nights when the weight of it all nearly crushed her. Nights when she lay awake in the empty bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made a mistake. If she should have begged him to stay, swallowed her pride, let the betrayal wash over her like so many women before her. But each time that thought crept in, she remembered the cafe. She remembered the laughter. And the doubt melted into rage again. The cracks in her resolve only made her more dangerous. One evening, as she was jotting notes, she heard a noise outside. Car door slamming. Footsteps on the gravel driveway. She froze, pen hovering above the paper. Then came the sound of keys jangling, and the front door creaked open. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. Richard. Back sooner than she expected. And he wasn't alone. The voice that followed his into the hallway was unmistakably female, lilting and sweet. Evelyn's chest tightened as the realization sank in. He had brought her here, to their home, their sanctuary, her sanctuary. The footsteps grew closer. Evelyn's pulse raced, her body trembling, but her mind sharpened like a blade. This was it. The moment when her two lives collided. And she knew, as the doorknob to the kitchen began to turn, that nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 5. The door swung open with a casualness that cut Evelyn like a blade. Richard's voice carried into the kitchen, low and smug, as if he owned the air in the house, as if he hadn't shattered her heart and declared himself her enemy. And then came the sound that made Evelyn's stomach knot, the light laugh of the woman with him. It wasn't the laugh itself that broke her. It was where it happened. Inside her house. Her house. Her grandfather's house. Evelyn sat perfectly still at the kitchen table, pen frozen midword, yellow notepad spread in front of her like evidence of her sanity. She hadn't planned for this moment, not tonight, not so soon. Her breath slowed, her heartbeat thundered in her ears, and she could feel the weight of everything she had been holding back crash into her at once. The kitchen door creaked open, and Richard stepped inside with the woman at his side. He didn't notice Evelyn at first. He was too busy leaning toward the woman, whispering something that made her giggle and grip his arm. His keys jingled in his hand, tossed carelessly onto the counter, the same counter Evelyn had polished hundreds of times through the years. He finally looked up, and froze. Evelyn's eyes locked onto his, steady, unblinking, sharp as glass. The silence stretched long enough to make the woman at his side shift uncomfortably. Evelyn didn't speak, not yet. She wanted him to. She wanted to see if he could summon even one word that would make sense of the scene, that would justify his audacity. "Evelyn," he finally muttered, the smug tone gone, replaced by something harder to name. Surprise. Annoyance. Maybe even fear, though he'd never admit it. The woman beside him, young, pretty, draped in perfume that clashed with the smell of Evelyn's kitchen, looked between them and frowned. "Whose?" "She's nobody," Richard cut in too fast. "Nobody." The word cracked through Evelyn's chest. 25 years. 2 children. Countless nights of laughter, sacrifice, and tears. And she was nobody. That was the moment the heat inside her chest hardened into steel. Do you know that feeling, viewers, when someone you trusted takes everything you are, everything you've done, and boils it down to nothing. When they erase you with one word. Tell me, what would you do if the man you once built a life had called you nobody in your own home? Would you scream? Would you break? Or would you let silence sharpen into something far more dangerous? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just let the word hang there like poison in the air. Her silence made Richard fidget, and he dropped his gaze, fiddling with the keys he had just thrown aside. The woman, Evelyn, refused to call her anything more, cleared her throat and tugged at his sleeve. Maybe we should go, she murmured, suddenly uneasy under the weight of Evelyn's stare. But Richard shook his head. No, this is my house. He said it with a little too much force, as if repeating the lie might make it true. Evelyn rose slowly, her chair scraping against the tile floor. The sound was small, but in that moment it filled the room like thunder. She stepped closer, close enough that Richard stiffened, close enough that the woman at his side instinctively pulled back. No, Evelyn said, her voice low but steady. It's not your house. Not anymore. Richard's jaw clenched, and for a moment the old arrogance flickered back in his eyes. You can't stop me, he said. You can't stop any of this. But Evelyn just smiled, the kind of smile that carried secrets, the kind that told him she knew something he didn't. And in truth she did. The papers, the plans, the truth she had been piecing together. It was all there waiting. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to beg. She just needed to wait. Richard grabbed the woman's hand and tugged her toward the living room, muttering about getting his things. Evelyn let him go. For now. Because while he thought he was collecting what was his, he was only digging himself deeper into a trap she was already setting. When the front door finally slammed behind them, Evelyn exhaled, her hands trembling. But beneath the tremor was power. She had seen it in his eyes, doubt. For the first time, Richard was no longer untouchable. That night, Evelyn pulled out the envelope again, the one she had kept hidden for years. Inside were the papers her grandfather had pressed into her hands long ago, his voice still echoing in her memory. Keep them safe, Evie. Paper outlives lies. She traced her fingers over the worn edges and felt the weight of them. Proof. Protection. A weapon Richard didn't know she had. The next morning, Evelyn made a call. Mireille's voice on the other end was calm, sharp, exactly what Evelyn needed. Bring me everything, the lawyer said. And Evie, don't let him bait you. Not yet. So Evelyn didn't. She let Richard play his game, parading his new woman around town, acting like he'd already won. But behind the scenes she built her case, piece by piece. Mireille worked on the legal side, while Corvin, the quiet digital forensics expert, began peeling back layers Richard didn't even know he had left exposed. Every night Evelyn sat at her table, sorting documents, highlighting notes, piecing together a story that Richard thought he had buried. And with every discovery, the old letters, the altered timestamps, the expired notary seals, her strength grew. But so did the danger. Because Richard wasn't a fool. He noticed the way Evelyn didn't break. He noticed the way she didn't chase him, didn't crumble, didn't scream. And that scared him. Because he knew Evelyn. He knew she was too quiet when she was planning, too calm when she was dangerous. So one evening, as Evelyn left the lawyer's office, she felt it, eyes on her. She turned quickly, but the street was empty. Still her gut twisted. Richard was watching. Or someone he had sent. The war had gone from papers and silence to shadows and presence. And Evelyn knew. It was only a matter of time before shadows turned to action. She hurried home, locked the doors, double-checked the windows. But even in the safety of her bedroom, the unease lingered. She tried to sleep, but every creak of the house jolted her awake. Every gust of wind against the window made her heart race. The battle lines were drawn, but she didn't know what he would do next. And that fear, that unknown, was the sharpest knife of all. When morning came, she told herself she wouldn't let fear control her. She made her coffee, opened her notepad, and wrote a single sentence across the top of the page. He doesn't know what's coming. And she believed it. Until the phone rang. She answered on instinct, expecting Mireille. But the voice on the other end was low, unfamiliar, and cold. You need to stop, Evelyn. You don't know what you're digging into. The line went dead before she could respond. Her hand shook as she set the phone down, her pulse racing. Whoever it was, they knew. They knew about the papers, the case, the plan. And if Richard wasn't afraid enough to call her himself, then who had he sent? Evelyn's eyes darted to the window, half expecting to see a shadow standing there. She saw nothing. But the silence outside suddenly felt heavy, as if the whole world was holding its breath. The war was no longer quiet. It was here. And Evelyn knew, as she clutched the envelope to her chest, that the next move would change everything. Chapter 6. The headlights flashed across the window again, cutting through the curtains like knives. Evelyn shot up in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was the third night in a row she had seen them. Same car, same slow roll past her driveway, same feeling in her gut that told her this wasn't a coincidence. She held her breath and listened. The engine idled for a moment, then faded away. Silence filled the house again, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that smothered, the kind that whispered, "He's watching you." She sat on the edge of her bed, pressing her palms against her knees until the tremor in her hands eased. She thought about calling Mireille, but it was 2:17 a.m. and her lawyer couldn't stop what she felt now. She thought about calling the police, but what could she say? Car drove past. They'd dismiss her. No proof, no crime. So she walked downstairs instead, barefoot, careful with each creaking step, until she reached the kitchen. She pulled out the envelope again. A deed. The letters. The trail her grandfather had left her. She spread them across the table and stared at them, as if the paper itself could give her courage. Her mind replayed Richard's smirk, the phone call with the stranger's voice, the sound of tires crunching outside her home. She hated that he was getting into her head. Hated that fear was making her doubt. And yet, in the middle of that fear, something else flared up, anger. A hot, steady anger that told her he didn't own her, no matter how hard he tried. And then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Click. Soft, faint, coming from the back door. Her breath caught. She rose slowly, her bare feet making no sound against the tile. She reached for the nearest thing she could grab, a heavy iron pan from the counter. She held it tight, her pulse roaring in her ears. The back door creaked. The knob jiggled once, twice. Then silence again. Whoever it was hadn't come in. Not yet. Evelyn stood frozen, gripping the pan until her knuckles went white. She thought about running upstairs, locking herself in her room, calling 911. But another thought pushed through louder. Don't show fear. Not now. Richard, she called out, her voice steady, stronger than she felt. Is that you? The silence stretched so long she thought maybe she had imagined it. But then she heard it. Footsteps retreating fast across the yard, crunching over gravel, fading into the distance. Evelyn exhaled, the air shuddering out of her lungs. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning she was done being quiet. She packed the papers into a folder, threw on a jacket, and drove straight to Mireille's office. When she arrived, Mireille studied her pale face, the dark circles under her eyes. "Tell me everything," she said softly. Evelyn did. The headlights, phone call, back door, the retreating footsteps. Mireille listened without interruption, then folded her hands on the desk. "They're trying to rattle you," she said. "It means we're close. Too close for them to feel safe." "That's good." "Good." Evelyn's voice cracked with disbelief. Mireille nodded. "Fear makes people sloppy. If Richard is desperate enough to send someone creeping around your house, it means he knows we have him cornered. It means he's afraid." Evelyn wanted to believe her. She wanted to soak in the lawyer's calm certainty. But all she could feel was the echo of those footsteps, the weight of that silence. Viewers, let me ask you, what would you do if you knew someone was watching you at night? Would you run? Would you hide? Or would you do what Evelyn did? Stand your ground even when your knees are shaking? Let me know in the comments below, because sometimes the scariest battles aren't in courtrooms or papers. They're in the shadows outside your window. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. That evening, Mireille connected Evelyn with Corvin again, the forensics man. This time he wasn't digging through documents. He installed cameras around her house. Tiny invisible eyes that would catch whatever shadows thought they could move unseen. Evelyn felt uneasy at first, knowing she was being watched even by her own equipment. But when the red light blinked on, she felt a flicker of safety. 2 nights later the car returned. It lingered longer this time, headlights washing over the windows like a searchlight. But this time, Evelyn didn't sit frozen in her bed. She sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, watching the live feed from Corvin's cameras. She saw the car. She saw the man step out. Not Richard. Someone taller, heavier, wearing a cap pulled low. The man walked to the back door again, tested the knob, leaned close as if trying to listen inside. Evelyn's chest tightened, but she didn't move. She let the camera capture everything. The man stepped back, looked over his shoulder, then disappeared into the trees. The car started up moments later and vanished down the road. The next morning, Corvin pulled the footage. He enhanced it, slowed it down, zoomed in on the man's face. It wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough. Enough to show that whoever Richard had sent wasn't just a shadow. He was real, tangible, traceable. "Do we take it to the police?" Evelyn asked. Mireille shook her head. "Not yet. If we play that card too soon, Richard will bury his tracks. We wait. We gather more. And when we strike hard." So they waited. And with every day that passed, Evelyn felt herself hardening. She went from trembling at creaks in the night to sitting calmly with her laptop, documenting, recording, building. She wasn't prey anymore. She was preparing. But Richard wasn't just watching. He was scheming. Evelyn discovered it when she overheard two women talking in the diner where she worked part-time. They mentioned Richard trying to sell something fast. Land, furniture, even family heirlooms. The desperation in his actions bled through gossip. Evelyn called Mireille immediately. "He's liquidating," she said. "He's trying to cash out before the truth lands." Mireille's voice was firm. "Then we don't wait any longer. We file for an injunction. We put everything on record. If he wants to play, let's drag his lies into the light." That week was a blur of signatures, stamps, filings. Evelyn sat in court for the first time. Her folder of documents clutched to her chest. Richard sat across the room. His smugness cracked just slightly at the edges. His lawyer spoke with polished words, but Evelyn watched Richard's hands. They fidgeted. They tapped the table. They betrayed him. Mireille stood and presented the papers one by one. The deed. The letters. The metadata. The footage. Every piece another nail hammered into the coffin of Richard's lies. The judge listened, patient but focused. Richard leaned forward, his face red with contained rage, whispering furiously to his lawyer. Evelyn felt a dark satisfaction bloom inside her. For the first time, she wasn't the one squirming under his shadow. He was. The hearing ended without a verdict, but with something just as valuable. A freeze order. Richard couldn't sell. He couldn't transfer. He couldn't move forward. When the gavel struck, Evelyn closed her eyes. It wasn't victory yet, but it was oxygen. She could breathe again. But that night, as she drove home from court, her headlights caught something on the road ahead. A car pulled out suddenly from a side street, speeding straight toward her. Evelyn swerved, tires screeching, heart slamming into her throat. The car veered off, disappearing into the night without a license plate visible. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. Was it an accident? Or was it another warning? She pulled into her driveway, sat there for a long time with the engine running, the house dark and silent before her. She knew she was close to breaking Richard. She also knew he wouldn't go down quietly. When she finally stepped inside, the kitchen light flickered on, and her envelope was gone. The table was bare. Her chest hollowed, her knees nearly buckling. The one weapon, the proof, the legacy her grandfather had entrusted to her, gone. And with that absence came the sharp, undeniable truth. Richard had been inside. Chapter 7. The papers were gone. Evelyn stood in the kitchen doorway, her throat tight, her chest hollow. The envelope that had carried her grandfather's voice, her last tether to truth, had vanished as if it had never been there at all. The table gleamed under the overhead light, empty, clean, and cruelly silent. She knew instantly this wasn't a mistake, wasn't her own forgetfulness. Someone had been inside. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had Richard broken in himself, or had he sent someone? She replayed the sound at the back door, The footsteps that had retreated days ago, and now the realization burned inside her. They had been testing her. Testing her locks, testing her fear, testing her resolve. And now they had taken what mattered most. Her first impulse was to tear the house apart, to check every drawer, every corner, every floorboard in case she had moved it without realizing. She yanked open cupboards, flipped cushions, pulled out boxes from under her bed. Nothing. Every frantic search only made the emptiness more absolute. She dropped onto the couch, her breath shuddering. For a moment she considered giving up. If Richard had the papers, if the proof was gone, what chance did she have left? All her courage, all the small victories, erased in a single night. But then she saw the camera feed blinking on her laptop. Corvin's eyes. Her protection. She lunged for it, scrolling through the recordings from the last hours. At first it showed nothing but quiet, shadows shifting across her yard. And movement. Figure at the back door again. The same one from before. Cap pulled low. Gloves. Deliberate, careful. The man worked the lock with ease, slipped inside, and re-emerged minutes later with the envelope in his hand. Evelyn paused the frame, zoomed in. The angle was bad, but she caught enough. A scar along the man's jawline. It wasn't Richard. It wasn't even someone she recognized. But it was someone real, someone traceable. Hope flickered. She printed the still frame, stuffed it in her jacket, and drove straight to Mireille's office. When Mireille saw the empty envelope, her eyes darkened. When she saw the still frame of the intruder, her jaw clenched. "They're bold now," she said. "That means they're scared. But it also means they're dangerous." "I can't fight without those papers," Evelyn whispered. Mireille leaned forward, her voice steady, unshaken. "Listen to me. The papers were important, but they were never the whole case. You still have copies, digital backups Corvin secured, metadata, timestamps, testimony. This fight isn't over." Evelyn stared at her, clinging to her words like a lifeline. But inside doubt gnawed. Were copies enough? Would the judge believe her without the originals? Or would Richard twist the theft into another accusation, that she fabricated everything? Viewers, pause here with me a moment. Imagine you're Evelyn. You've guarded the one thing that proved your enemy wrong, only to wake and find it stolen. Would you believe you could still win? Or would you crumble under the weight of loss? Tell me what you think, because sometimes the line between surrender and survival is razor thin. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The days that followed were a blur of unease. Evelyn went to work, but every customer's face looked suspicious. She walked through her home, but every creak in the floorboards felt like a threat. She tried to sleep, but every car outside jolted her awake. Richard, meanwhile, grew louder in town. People whispered about his anger in public, about his threats muttered over drinks. He insisted Evelyn was lying, forging, manipulating. He painted himself as the victim, a man robbed of his inheritance by a bitter granddaughter with a clever lawyer. His words spread like oil, slick and hard to wash away. One afternoon, Evelyn overheard two men at the gas station. "You hear about that girl? Trying to take Richard's land. Whole family's mess, I tell you. Bet she made the whole thing up." She kept her head down, pumping gas, cheeks burning with shame and fury. The smear campaign was working. Richard wasn't just fighting her in court. He was poisoning the town against her. Mireille warned her this would happen. "He'll attack your character because he can't defend his lies. Don't let it shake you. People talk. The truth will cut through when the time comes." But Evelyn felt the weight of every glance, every whispered word. She wondered if her grandfather had faced this too. Being doubted, dismissed, mocked. One evening, she found herself driving to the edge of her grandfather's land. The fields stretched quiet under the fading sky, the house silhouetted against the horizon. She parked and sat there, staring at it, imagining him sitting on the porch with his pipe, telling her not to give in. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Just one sentence. "Stop now or you'll regret it." Her blood ran cold. She looked around, half expecting headlights behind her. But the road was empty. Still, the message pulsed on her screen like a threat carved into her mind. She showed it to Mireille the next morning. Mireille's face stayed calm, but Evelyn saw the tension in her eyes. "They're escalating," she said. "Good. It means they're cornered." "Good," Evelyn whispered, incredulous. "Yes, They're slipping. And every mistake they make is more evidence we can use. Don't delete that message. Corvin worked quietly in the background, tracing the number, digging deeper into the scar-faced intruder. Days later he returned with a name, Mason Klein. History of break-ins. Rumored to have worked for Richard before. The puzzle pieces were aligning. Evelyn felt both relief and terror. Relief that they had a name, a face, proof. Terror that Richard had gone this far. Hiring criminals, breaking into her home, sending threats. How much further would he go? The hearing loomed. Evelyn dressed carefully, her hands trembling as she buttoned her blouse. She carried the folder of copies, the still frame of Mason, the text message. Richard was already there when she arrived, leaning back in his chair with that familiar smirk. The judge called the session to order. Mireille stood, calm and sharp as a blade. She laid out the theft, the surveillance footage, the threats. Richard's lawyer objected, sneered, twisted words. But every time he spoke, Mireille countered with precision. Evelyn sat silent, heart pounding, eyes locked on Richard. For the first time she saw cracks in his armor. He shifted in his seat. He whispered angrily to his lawyer. His smirk faltered. The judge didn't rule that day. He asked for more evidence, more review. Another delay. Another stretch of waiting. Evelyn felt both crushed and determined. She wanted resolution, but she also wanted to make sure no shadow of doubt could save Richard. That night, she drove home exhausted, headlights sweeping across her yard. She parked, climbed out and froze. Her front door was ajar. She hadn't left it that way. Slowly, carefully, she stepped inside. The living room was in chaos. Drawers pulled open, papers scattered, furniture overturned. Her heart slammed. She thought of the cameras, ran to her laptop, pulled up the feed. The footage showed them. 2 men. Not just Mason, another with him. Both tearing through her house like wolves. Searching. Desperate. Evelyn stared at the screen. Horror mixing with grim realization. They hadn't just come for the papers. They were looking for something else. Something she didn't even know she had. And as she scrolled through the footage, her stomach dropped. Because in the final frame, Mason looked straight into the camera. Straight at her. As if he knew she was watching. As if to say, "We see you too." Chapter 8. The house felt different after that night. It wasn't just the mess, the overturned drawers, the broken picture frames. It was the air itself. Heavy, polluted with the knowledge that men had walked freely through what was supposed to be her safe place, hunting for something she didn't even know she had. The sight of Mason staring straight into the camera burned into her memory, haunting her every blink. It wasn't just about papers anymore. It wasn't even about property. It was about power, intimidation, fear. They wanted her broken. Evelyn didn't sleep. She sat in the corner of her room with a baseball bat she had pulled from the closet, her eyes on the window, her ears tuned to every sound. The house creaked and settled like old bones. With every snap of wood felt like footsteps, every gust against the siding like a hand reaching in. By dawn, her nerves were raw, her mind a tangled knot. She knew she couldn't stay there. Not alone. Not with Mason watching, waiting. She called Mireille the second the sun rose. Her voice cracked as she explained, the words spilling fast, frantic. Mireille listened, steady as always, and when Evelyn finished, her answer was calm but decisive. "Pack a bag. Come stay with me until the next hearing. We'll get security measures in place. You're not fighting this war from an unguarded porch." Evelyn hesitated. Leaving felt like surrender. Her grandfather's house wasn't just a building. It was him, his memory, his love. Abandoning it even for a night felt like betrayal. But the thought of Mason's eyes, those cold, knowing eyes, erased her pride. She packed. Driving out of the driveway felt like retreating from a battlefield with flags still standing. She watched the oak tree shrink in her mirror and promised herself she'd return, stronger, armed with the truth. Mireille's apartment was small but secure. Multiple locks, an alarm system, neighbors who kept watch. Evelyn collapsed onto the guest bed, exhaustion pulling her under, though even in sleep she jerked awake, Mason's face etched against her dreams. Viewers, I need you to step into her shoes for a second. Imagine the one place you thought was safe being ripped open, not just with locks broken but with your enemies leaving a message in their eyes, telling you that nowhere is off limits. What would you do? Would you stand, fight harder, or would you crumble? Think about it, because survival often demands choices you never imagined you'd have to make. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Days blurred together at Mireille's. Corvin came by often, hunched over his laptop, tracing the threads left behind by Mason and his partner. He worked quietly, methodically, like a surgeon cutting through tissue. His eyes narrowing at lines of code, his fingers never slowing. Evelyn watched him, desperate for answers. Finally, after hours of silence, he leaned back. They weren't looking for the deed, he said softly. Not just that. They were searching for something else. Something hidden. What? Evelyn whispered. He turned the screen toward her. It showed fragments of scanned documents, some torn, some corrupted. Your grandfather kept more records than anyone realized. Journals, ledgers, letters. Not just about property. About deals, about debts, about people. If Richard knew these existed, he'd want them destroyed. Especially if any of them tied him to fraud. Evelyn's heart hammered. Her grandfather had been meticulous, secretive at times. She remembered him locking drawers, hiding keys, muttering about keeping things safe. Could he have hidden records that Richard feared? It explained the desperation, the break-ins, the threats. Richard wasn't just trying to take the house. He was trying to bury something. The thought twisted Evelyn's grief into fire. Her grandfather had trusted her. He'd left her breadcrumbs, papers, notes. Maybe he'd known this fight would come. Maybe he'd prepared her, even if she hadn't understood at the time. But if Richard was tearing through her home, he hadn't found it yet. That meant it was still there, waiting. He told Mireille. Mireille studied her with sharp eyes. If your grandfather left something, it could be the key. But retrieving it will be dangerous. You won't go back alone. The plan formed quickly. Corvin would monitor the house remotely. Mireille would accompany her. And they'd search for what Richard's men had missed. Evelyn felt her fear rise, but beneath it was a stubborn thread of determination. She would not let Mason's stare be the last word. 2 nights later they returned. The house looked quiet, innocent under the moonlight, but Evelyn's hands trembled on the steering wheel. She parked down the road, cut the engine, and listened. The silence pressed against her ears. No movement, no lights. They entered carefully, Mireille leading with a flashlight, Evelyn clutching her bat again. The mess remained. Drawers open, furniture displaced, but now it looked less like chaos and more like opportunity. If Mason hadn't found what he wanted, that meant it was hidden deeper. They searched. Hours passed. Behind picture frames, under floorboards, inside the chimney. Dust clung to their skin, cobwebs tangled in their hair. Evelyn's muscles ached, her hope dimmed. Maybe Richard had taken it already. Maybe there was nothing left. But then Mireille's light caught something. A faint line in the paneling of the hallway wall, near the baseboard. She knelt, tap. Hello. Evelyn's heart jumped. Together they pried it loose. Behind it was a small wooden box, old, worn, its latch rusted but intact. Evelyn's hands shook as she pulled it free. Her breath catching as if her grandfather's spirit were standing there, guiding her. She opened it. Inside were journals. Dozens of pages, yellowed with time, filled with her grandfather's careful script. Letters addressed to lawyers. Notes on land transfers. And one folder marked with Richard's name. Evelyn flipped it open. Her eyes widened. Statements, contracts, proof of money moved in the shadows. Proof of signatures forged. Proof of debts owed to dangerous men. Proof that Richard wasn't just greedy. He was corrupt to his core. Her knees buckled. She clutched the folder to her chest, tears spilling. It was here. It had been here all along, waiting for her. But before relief could settle, a sound shattered it. The crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights washed through the window, blinding, invasive. Evelyn froze. Mireille grabbed her arm, pulling her back into the shadows. They crouched, breathless, as the engine cut. Doors slammed. Footsteps approached. Richard's voice. Low, furious. "Search again. It's here." "I know it." Mason's growl followed. Heavy boots thudded across the porch. The front door creaked. They were inside. Evelyn clutched the folder tighter, panic roaring in her chest. The box was still open, the wall panel loose. They couldn't hide everything. They couldn't outrun both men. Mireille's hand gripped hers, steady, grounding. "Stay quiet," she mouthed. But Evelyn's pulse pounded so loudly she feared it would give them away. Richard's shadow loomed in the hallway. His flashlight beam swept across the floor, inches from their feet. He was close, too close. And then Mason's voice came from behind, grating, certain. "She's here." Chapter 9. The sound of shattering glass rang through the darkened living room like a gunshot, sharp and final, slicing through the tense silence that had been hovering for too long. Eleanor didn't move at first. She just stared at the broken shards glistening across the hardwood floor like frozen raindrops. Her breath caught halfway in her chest. One wrong step, one wrong word, and everything would collapse. It felt as though the whole house was holding its breath with her. The night air crept in from the window, cool and sharp, carrying with it the promise of a storm outside. Inside, the real storm was already here. Across the room, Matthew stood with his fists clenched, his knuckles red, his chest heaving. His eyes carried something Eleanor had seen before in other men but never expected to see in him. A fire made of guilt and rage that had nowhere safe to burn. "You think you know everything, don't you?" he spat. His voice trembling in that dangerous way that meant he was fighting to keep it from cracking. "You think just because you've been hurt, you're the only one allowed to play judge and jury?" But Eleanor didn't answer. She couldn't, not yet. Her silence was her armor, her last protection against saying the wrong thing. She had already come too far, sacrificed too much to let her emotions explode now. Yet inside, her heart was racing so hard she thought it might give her away. This was the moment, the place where secrets either saved you or destroyed you. And Eleanor knew which side of the line she stood on. She took a step forward, her heel crunching lightly over a shard of glass, and Matthew flinched as if she had fired a shot. His reaction gave her the tiniest taste of power, one she held onto like a drowning woman clinging to a scrap of wood. "Viewers, can I ask you something right now? Imagine being in Eleanor's shoes for just a second. You've spent years building a life, only to discover betrayal waiting in the shadows of your own home. What would you do? Confront it head-on, burn everything down, or swallow the truth and live with the poison of silence? Share your thoughts, because this is one of those moments where choices don't just change the story, they change lives. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story." Eleanor's lips parted, finally releasing the words she had held like a secret weapon. "I don't need to know everything, Matthew. I just need to know enough. And trust me, I know enough to end this tonight." The weight of her words crashed into the air between them. For a split second, Matthew's shoulders sagged as if he'd been struck, and Eleanor thought she'd won. But then he smiled. Not the smile of a man who had been caught, but the smile of someone who knew he had a card left to play. It was cruel, smug, and terrifying. "You think you've cornered me," he said softly. "But Eleanor, you have no idea what kind of game you're in." And with that, he walked toward the doorway, calm now. His anger transformed into something colder, sharper. She wanted to stop him, to demand the truth right there, but something inside warned her to wait, to let the tension build, to let him believe she was afraid. The storm outside broke at last, rain hammering against the windows, the wind howling like a warning. Eleanor stood alone in the flickering light of the shattered lamp, and for the first time, she felt the battle shifting. This was no longer about his betrayal, it was about survival. She thought back to the day she first suspected him. The way his phone seemed to disappear whenever she walked into the room, the late nights explained away by work, the smell of perfume that wasn't hers clinging faintly to his shirts. Each memory was a nail in the coffin she had been quietly building for him. But tonight, with the storm raging outside, she realized the coffin might hold more than just his lies. It might hold her future too. As Matthew's footsteps echoed up the staircase, Eleanor's mind raced. Did he have evidence hidden away? Something that could destroy her if she pushed too far? Or was he bluffing, hoping she would break under the weight of fear? She couldn't let him see her doubt. Not now. Not when she was so close to uncovering everything. The house groaned under the wind, and Eleanor slowly bent down to pick up one of the larger shards of glass from the floor. It felt heavy in her hand, almost like a weapon. She didn't know if she meant to keep it for protection or as a reminder of what had shattered between them. Maybe both. "Eleanor!" Matthew's voice boomed from upstairs, startling her. "Don't you dare leave this house tonight. Do you hear me? Don't take one step out that door." His command echoed through the halls, but instead of fear, Eleanor felt a rush of defiance. Who was he to command her anymore? He had broken vows, broken trust, broken her heart, and yet he thought he could still control her. Not tonight. She slipped the shard into her pocket, straightened her shoulders, and moved toward the front door. Every step felt like a rebellion, every heartbeat like a drum warning of war. The rain pounded louder, daring her to open that door and step into the storm. Her hand hovered over the knob when she heard it, the unmistakable creak of footsteps coming down the stairs. Slow, deliberate, heavy. The game had changed. Audience, if you were Eleanor, would you open that door and run, or would you turn and face him right here, right now? Comment below. I want to hear your hearts on this. Because the decision she makes next will not just decide her fate, but his too. Eleanor's hand tightened on the knob, but before she could decide, the lights flickered once, twice, then died. The house plunged into darkness, leaving only the storm outside to light the world in violent flashes. And in that lightning glow, Eleanor saw him at the bottom of the stairs. His face half in shadow, his eyes glinting with something unreadable. "Where are you going, Eleanor?" he asked softly, almost tenderly. But the tenderness was laced with venom. Her pulse thundered. She had to make a choice. She had to act, because waiting meant giving him the upper hand. The storm roared, the walls shook, and in that moment, Eleanor realized something that changed everything. Matthew wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of losing control. And that was the weapon she needed to win. Flickered a crack in his mask. He hadn't expected this either. "Don't answer it," he whispered harshly. "Do you hear me? Don't." But Eleanor knew the choice wasn't his anymore. She pulled the door open. The storm wind rushed in, nearly knocking her backward. On the porch stood a figure cloaked in rain, their face obscured by the shadows. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The storm swallowed every sound but the thundering of Eleanor's heart. And then the figure stepped forward, raising their head just enough for her to see. Her knees nearly buckled. Because the face staring back at her was one she thought she'd never see again. The past had come knocking, literally. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that was about to break inside that house. And that's where I'll leave you, because what happens next will shatter everything Eleanor thought she knew, not just about Matthew, but about herself. Viewers, tell me, if someone from your past showed up on your doorstep at the exact moment your life was falling apart, would you let them in or shut the door forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the explosive Chapter 10. Because trust me, you will not want to miss how this ends. Chapter 10. The storm clung to the house like a living thing, rattling the windows, shaking the rafters, making every sound sharper, more dangerous. The figure on the porch stepped inside, rain dripping from their coat, boots heavy against the hardwood. Eleanor's throat went dry as she stared, unable to form the words pressing against her lips. For a long moment, it was as if the entire world had narrowed down to 3 people standing in one room. Her, Matthew, and the ghost from her past made flesh. "Clara," Eleanor whispered at last, her voice barely audible over the howl of the storm. Clara, her sister. The sister who had vanished 20 years ago without a trace. The sister everyone assumed was dead. The sister who had been the first to warn Eleanor about Matthew back when their lives were simpler, before betrayal and lies became everyday currency. But here she was, alive, soaked to the bone, her face older, harder, marked by lines of suffering Eleanor couldn't begin to imagine. Clara's eyes flicked between Eleanor and Matthew, and in that instant, Eleanor saw the recognition, the rage, the unfinished story that had been hiding for decades. Matthew's face drained of color. For once, his mask slipped completely, and in that crack Eleanor saw fear. True, unguarded fear. "Clara," he said flatly, his voice stripped of its bravado. "I thought you were dead." Clara's laugh was sharp, bitter, like glass breaking. Oh no, Matthew. You didn't get that lucky. The air thickened until Eleanor felt she could choke on it. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where had Clara been? Why now? Why here? But her instincts told her to stay silent. To let the storm outside and the storm between them collide on their own. Clara stepped closer, the rain still dripping from her coat onto the floor. Her presence filled the room with a dangerous energy, the kind that makes your skin prickle before lightning strikes. She locked eyes with Eleanor, her voice trembling but strong. I came back for you, Elle. I couldn't stay away any longer. Not when I knew what he was capable of. Matthew's hands twitched at his sides, like he wanted to grab her, silence her, but fear kept him frozen. Eleanor had never seen him this way before. Vulnerable. Cornered. Audience, let me pull you in right here. What would you do if a long-lost family member walked back into your life at the exact moment everything was collapsing? Would you embrace them, or would you question why they left in the first place? Drop your thoughts below because Eleanor's decision here is going to shape everything that follows. Eleanor swallowed hard. Clara, what do you mean? What is he capable of? Clara's eyes flicked to Matthew, then back to Eleanor. You deserve the truth. And it's time he stopped hiding. Matthew exploded forward suddenly, his composure shattering. Stop this, he shouted, his voice jagged with panic. You don't know what you're talking about. Eleanor, don't listen to her. She's always been jealous, always trying to twist things. She's lying. But his words rang hollow now, every syllable sounding more like desperation than defense. Eleanor's heart thudded painfully in her chest. The man who once commanded every room he entered was unraveling right in front of her. Clara's face hardened. Tell her, Matthew. Or I will. The silence stretched so long that the storm itself seemed to pause. Eleanor's breath hitched, her palms clammy. And then Matthew spoke. Low, broken, a confession dragged out against his will. I never meant for her to know, he muttered. His eyes avoided Eleanor's, darting instead to the window, to the shadows, anywhere but her face. It was supposed to be over. Buried. Forgotten. Eleanor's stomach twisted. What was supposed to be forgotten? Matthew's lips trembled, and for the first time, he looked small to her. Clara wasn't gone because she wanted to be. She was gone because of me. The words detonated like a bomb in the room. Eleanor staggered back, her mind reeling. Her eyes flew to Clara, who nodded grimly, tears mixing with the rain on her face. He tried to silence me, Clara whispered. All those years ago when I found out what he was doing. The money, the lies, the betrayal, not just to you, Elle, but to others. I tried to expose him. He made me disappear. He thought he'd erased me. But I survived. Eleanor's body shook, a mix of rage, sorrow, and disbelief crashing inside her. The man she had loved, trusted, built a life with wasn't just a betrayer of hearts. He was a destroyer of lives. Eleanor, Matthew pleaded, his voice ragged. You don't understand. I did it for us. For the life we built. She would have ruined everything. I couldn't let that happen. But Eleanor saw the truth now. The life she thought they had built wasn't a sanctuary. It was a cage made of his lies, his control, his selfishness. And Clara had been the first victim. Her breath came fast, ragged. She thought of all the years she had lost. The sacrifices, the tears, the endless second-guessing of herself. And now she realized. None of it had been her fault. None of it. Audience, let me ask you. When you finally see the truth about someone who's broken you, do you forgive or do you take your justice? Would you walk away quietly? Or would you burn the lies down to ash? Share your voice, because this is the very crossroads Eleanor is standing at right now. Clara stepped beside Eleanor, placing a trembling but firm hand on her shoulder. You don't have to face this alone anymore. Eleanor's eyes burned with tears, but her voice was steel. No, I don't. She turned to Matthew, her rage finally given words. You tried to break me, Matthew. You tried to bury her. But you failed. And tonight, everything you've hidden will be exposed. Matthew's face contorted, torn between fury and despair. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might attack. But then, something in him cracked. He dropped to his knees, his hands covering his face. His sobs muffled and broken. The storm raged outside, but inside, Eleanor felt something shift. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one crumbling. He was. And yet, as satisfying as it was to see him broken, she knew this wasn't the end. Justice had to be more than watching him collapse. Justice had to be the truth told, the lies dismantled, the pain transformed into something that could heal. She exchanged a glance with Clara, who nodded. The sisters, once separated by lies and fear, stood together again, ready to face what came next. But just as Eleanor felt the strength of their unity, the front door slammed open once more. A rush of cold wind swept in, and in the doorway stood two uniformed officers, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Eleanor Carter. One of them called. Her heart lurched. Yes. We need you to come with us. Shock froze her. What? Why? The officer's eyes flicked past her to Matthew, still kneeling, then back to Eleanor. Because your husband called us earlier tonight. He reported you as dangerous. The words hit her like another betrayal, one last desperate move from the man unraveling before her. Her voice caught in her throat. Dangerous. Me. Matthew looked up. His face streaked with tears but his smile bitter, triumphant. You didn't think I'd go down without a fight, did you? Eleanor's stomach dropped. Even now, even at his lowest, he had found a way to twist the narrative, to make her the villain in someone else's eyes. Clara stepped forward quickly. Officers, please, you don't know the truth. You need to hear what he did. But the officers were firm, their hands already reaching for Eleanor. Eleanor felt the walls closing in again, the taste of injustice bitter in her mouth. But this time, she wasn't the same woman who had silently suffered for years. This time she had Clara. She had the truth. And she had a voice she wasn't afraid to use anymore. She straightened, her chin lifting, her voice calm but fierce. I'll go with you. But when I speak, when the truth comes out, the world will see who the real danger has been all along. The storm thundered above them as the officers led her out, Clara by her side, Matthew's sobs echoing behind them. And in that storm, Eleanor felt something new break through the darkness. Freedom. Viewers, I want to leave you with this. When betrayal rips your world apart, when lies threaten to define your story, remember, you always have the power to reclaim your voice. Eleanor's journey isn't just hers. It's a reminder that even in the darkest storm, truth can be the light that sets you free. If this story has touched you, if it's made you think about love, betrayal, and the power of standing tall, please hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and join this family. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were Eleanor? Would you forgive or would you fight? Your words might inspire someone else walking through their own storm tonight. And don't forget, another story is coming soon. One filled with love, choices, and the strength we all carry inside. Stay tuned because the next chapter isn't just a story. It could be the one that reminds you of your own strength.